The sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, casting a golden glow over the tranquil Mthini village. The rhythmic sound of drums echoed from the heart of the village, where preparations for Sibanjai's wedding were in full swing. The air was thick with excitement, anticipation, and the smell of roasting meats, as women from all corners of the village worked together to prepare the feast. But beneath the surface of this jubilant occasion, something dark was brewing, a sense of unease that none could yet name. Sibanjai stood at the river's edge, staring at the rushing waters, her heart gripped by an inexplicable fear. Her thoughts were heavy, her breath shallow. "This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life, isn't it?" she thought. "Why then does it feel like I'm standing on the edge of a precipice?" Thandika, her elder sister, approached her, her eyes full of concern. "Can you feel it?" she whispered. "Something is wrong, Sibanjai. The wedding, it's not what it seems." Sibanjai turned to face her, her voice trembling. "What do you mean?" "This is our wedding, Thandika. Our future." "Trust me," Thandika said softly. "This woman, the wedding planner, she's not here to help. She's got her own agenda." The words hung in the air, and for the first time Sibanjai began to wonder if Thandika was right. Could it be that the woman they had trusted with their dream wedding was, in fact, the architect of a nightmare? Sibanjai was a young woman with a heart as vast as the savannah. Born to Nakyalunga, a farmer in the Mthini village, she had always found peace in the simplicity of her life. Her days were spent helping her mother tend to the garden, fetching water from the river, and joining in the village's communal activities. Her life had been unassuming, filled with laughter and love, until Jabulani, the son of the village chief, proposed to her. Jabulani was everything Sibanjai had ever wanted, a kind and gentle soul with a heart full of warmth. Their love story was one of simplicity, built on respect, shared values, and mutual understanding. They had planned for a small, intimate wedding, one that reflected the humble nature of their lives. It would be a ceremony steeped in tradition, nothing grand, nothing excessive, just the love they shared. However, their plans began to change when Nandi, a well-known wedding planner from the bustling city of Umthambo, came to visit their village. Nandi was not just any wedding planner, she was a woman of power, influence, and elegance. Her name was whispered in awe by those who had experienced her work. She had orchestrated weddings in places far grander than Mthini, and the wealth of her clients spoke volumes about her expertise. When Nandi first approached Sibanjai and Jabulani, they were hesitant. After all, they had no need for extravagant celebrations. Their modest life had always been enough. But Nandi's persuasive nature was hard to resist. With her polished manners, impeccable style, and promises of a wedding that would be the talk of the entire region, she quickly gained their trust. "You deserve more than a simple wedding," Nandi had told Sibanjai, her voice smooth like honey. "This is your once-in-a-lifetime moment. You should have a celebration worthy of the love you share, something that will make you and Jabulani the envy of all. I can make that happen." Nandi's offer was tantalizing, and though Sibanjai's heart tugged at her, the allure of a perfect wedding, something that would be remembered for generations, was too powerful to resist. They agreed. As the weeks passed, Nandi's influence over the wedding grew. What had initially started as a modest affair was now evolving into a grand spectacle. Marquees, imported fabrics, and luxurious decorations flooded the village. Nandi was everywhere, making decisions without consulting Sibanjai or Jabulani, insisting that they needed to think bigger. The couple was to wear lavish, city-style outfits, and the ceremony would be held in a giant tent that could hold hundreds of guests. Even the food would be imported, foreign fruits and dishes no one in Mthini had ever tasted before. The elders, who had always been a vital part of the wedding ceremonies in Mthini, were uneasy with these changes. In the past, weddings had been an expression of the village's traditions, simple yet meaningful. The bride would wear a beautiful hand-woven skirt, adorned with beads that told the story of her ancestors. The ceremony would be blessed by the elders, and the food would be prepared by the women who had nurtured the village with their hands. But Nandi was determined to change it all. "We must move forward," she insisted. "A traditional wedding won't make an impact. You need something unforgettable." Sibanjai's mother, Nakyalunga, had reservations. "But Nandi," she said gently, "our traditions are what keep us strong. They connect us to our ancestors. Are you sure this change is necessary?" Nandi smiled indulgently. "Your traditions are beautiful, but they belong to the past. The world is changing and so must you. Let me help you embrace the future." Sibanjai tried to voice her concerns, but Nandi's presence was overwhelming. She had a way of making people feel small, like their opinions didn't matter. The wedding was no longer about Sibinjile and Jabulani, it was about something else entirely. As the days drew closer to the wedding, Sibinjile's unease grew. The once joyful preparations had become a pressure-filled ordeal. The laughter of the women had been replaced by tension, as Nandi barked orders and made decisions that seemed to have no regard for the people she was supposed to be helping. Sibinjile found herself at the river one evening, alone. The cool water lapped gently at her feet as she stared into the distance. She was supposed to be happy. This was supposed to be her wedding day, the most joyous day of her life. Yet all she felt was a deep sense of dread. Something was off. Thandika, ever the protective older sister, appeared beside her. "You've been quiet lately, Sibinjile. What's on your mind?" Sibinjile hesitated, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. "I don't know, Thandika. I don't think this wedding is what I thought it would be. Nandi is changing everything, our traditions, our way of life. It doesn't feel right." Thandika frowned. "I've been noticing that too. She's pushing too hard. This wedding should be about you and Jabulani, not about some extravagant spectacle. You need to speak up, Sibinjile, before it's too late." But Sibinjile felt trapped. Nandi had already taken control. The villagers were already preparing, the invitations had been sent, and the pressure to make everything perfect had become unbearable. What if they cancelled everything now? What would people think? What would Jabulani think? That evening, Nandi arrived at the village with an entourage. She was wearing a sleek, high-fashion dress that seemed out of place in Thini. Her presence was commanding, and she immediately took charge, her voice rising above the noise of the preparations. "Everything must be perfect," Nandi declared. "No more mistakes. I've worked too hard to let anything go wrong." Sibinjile felt a knot form in her stomach. She had never seen Nandi like this before. There was something menacing in her tone, something that sent a chill down Sibinjile's spine. She had once trusted this woman, but now she wasn't so sure. Thandika caught Sibinjile's eye from across the clearing, and the look in her sister's gaze was filled with warning. Sibinjile's heart raced. She had a sinking feeling that the wedding, her wedding, was about to take a dark turn. But could she stop it in time? As the night wore on, Sibinjile could no longer ignore the truth that gnawed at her. Nandi was not the wedding planner she had hoped for. She was something darker. Someone who cared only for her own ambitions, someone willing to tear apart everything that mattered to Sibinjile for the sake of her own glory. And so, with the wedding day fast approaching, Sibinjile stood at the edge of the river, the cold wind brushing against her skin, and for the first time she began to question everything. The life she had always known, the traditions she had cherished, and the love she had with Jabulani were all under threat by a woman who had hidden her true intentions behind a veil of charm and promises. The sun rose the next day with an unsettling quietness, as if the world itself had taken a breath before what was about to unfold. Sibinjile lay in her bed, wide awake, staring at the woven straw ceiling of her hut. The wind whistled softly outside, but it could not drown out the heavy thudding of her heart. The events of the previous evening had left her feeling like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, her feet dangling dangerously over the edge. She had thought that marrying Jabulani would be a joyous occasion, a culmination of years of love and shared dreams. But now it felt more like a battle for control over her life. Nandi, with her forceful presence and relentless demands, had become the puppet master, pulling strings that Sibinjile hadn't even known existed. There was a knock at her door. Sibinjile hesitated, her heart racing. "Come in," she called weakly. It was her mother, Nakyalunga, standing in the doorway. The older woman's face was worn with age, but her eyes were sharp, eyes that had seen decades of hardship and triumph. She wore a simple dress made of woven cloth, the kind that had been passed down through generations in the village, with beads hanging from her neck, each one symbolizing a different part of their history. "You've been quiet, my child," Nakyalunga said, her voice soft but carrying an undercurrent of concern. "What troubles your heart?" Sibinjile sat up, pushing aside the heavy blanket that had been wrapped around her the night before. "I don't know, Mama. This wedding, it's becoming something I don't recognize. Nandi has taken over everything, every detail, every decision. I don't even feel like I'm the one getting married." Nakyalunga sighed and sat beside her daughter. "I can see it too, Sibinjile. I knew something wasn't right when Nandi came to our village. She has a way of making everyone feel small, of convincing you that you don't know what's best for your own life. But remember, my daughter, you are the one who should be in charge of this day, not her." Sibinjile nodded but couldn't shake the feeling that she had lost control. Nandi had convinced them that their wedding needed to be grand to make a statement. But now it felt like a machine turning relentlessly without room for her or Jabulani to stand still and take a breath. "Mama, I'm scared," Sibinjile confessed, her voice trembling. "What if it's already too late to change things?" Nakyalunga placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, squeezing it gently. "It is never too late to make things right, Sibinjile. You are the one who decides how your life unfolds. Not Nandi, not anyone else. You must speak up, my child, or you will lose what is most precious to you." The morning passed in a blur as Sibinjile and her family prepared for the wedding. The ground beneath the giant wedding tent had been covered in imported carpets that seemed too luxurious for the dusty earth of Mthini. The women of the village had sewn their best garments, but even they couldn't hide the discomfort in their eyes. The traditional robes, once so familiar and meaningful, felt out of place beneath the towering, foreign decorations. Sibinjile could feel the pressure mounting. The entire village was waiting, eager to see the extravagant celebration. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, "You are the one who decides." But what could she do now? The invitations had been sent. People had already begun arriving from distant towns. Nandi had promised a spectacle, a wedding so grand that it would be talked about for generations. How could Sibinjile undo everything now without disappointing everyone? As the time for the ceremony drew near, Nandi arrived with her usual entourage, her sharp heels clicking on the dusty ground as she approached the tent. Her smile was flawless, but there was something cold in her eyes, something that made Sibinjile's blood run cold. She had been keeping her distance, observing from afar, hoping that the wedding planner's influence would somehow fade, but it hadn't. "Ah, Sibinjile, my dear," Nandi greeted her with a wide, practiced smile. "Everything is coming together perfectly. You should be proud." Sibinjile forced a smile in return, but her insides churned. It's beautiful, Nandi. But I can't help but feel that it's too much. Our people, our traditions, this doesn't feel like us." Nandi's eyes hardened, though her smile never wavered. "Too much? No, my dear. This is exactly what you need. The world is changing and you need to embrace that. Think of the future. Think of your children and their children, who will look back at this day as the one that put Mthini on the map." Her words were like poison, slipping into Sibinjile's mind and twisting it. The wedding was no longer about love or tradition. It was about impressing the world. It was about image. Sibinjile's heart sank as the reality of it all set in. She was standing on the edge of a precipice and she didn't know how to step back. As the wedding ceremony began, the air was thick with tension. Guests were seated in rows beneath the elaborate canopy, their faces filled with curiosity and excitement. The sound of drums filled the air, but even their rhythm seemed forced, as though the music itself was caught in the web of Nandi's control. Sibinjile, dressed in an elaborate gown of bright colors and intricate beads, walked down the aisle with Jabulani. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt truly at ease. Her mind raced as she caught sight of Nandi's cold, calculating eyes from the back of the tent. The woman was watching every movement, every detail. Sibinjile couldn't shake the feeling that Nandi was waiting for her to slip up, to make a mistake. And she feared that any mistake would be used to further tighten her grip on the wedding, and on Sibinjile's life. Jabulani's hand in hers was the only thing that felt real. His gentle squeeze gave her a sense of comfort, but even he seemed lost in the spectacle. The people cheered, but their smiles were not the warm, familiar expressions of Mthini. They were the smiles of guests who had come to witness an event, not a celebration of love. As the ceremony proceeded, Sibinjile's thoughts turned inward. What do I do? What can I do? The answer seemed impossible. She had no power over the wedding anymore. Nandi had taken that from her. And yet, something inside her refused to let go completely. After the vows were exchanged and the guests began to feast on the foreign dishes, Sibinjile found herself alone in a quiet corner of the tent. She needed a moment to think, to clear her mind. But as she walked away from the gathering, she bumped into Thandika, who had been standing near the entrance, watching the proceedings with a stern look on her face. "You look lost, Sibinjile," Thandika said quietly. "This isn't your wedding anymore, is it? You've given it all away to her. You've let Nandi take everything from you." Sibinjile's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. "I don't know what to do, Thandika. I don't know how to stop this." Thandika's expression softened. "It's not too late. You can still take control. This is your life, not hers. The wedding is meant to celebrate you and Jabulani, not Nandi's vision of what she thinks you should be. If you don't speak up now, it will be too late." Sibinjile nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision ahead. It was time to take back what had been taken from her. But how? How could she reclaim her wedding, her life, from the claws of someone so powerful and persuasive? Sibinjile stood on the edge of the village that evening, her eyes scanning the horizon. The last traces of sunlight painted the sky in warm oranges and pinks, but the beauty of the moment did little to calm her racing thoughts. The wedding had been a spectacle, just as Nandi had promised. Guests from far and wide had witnessed the grand event, the lavish feast and the overwhelming display of wealth. But what was it all for? It wasn't for her. It wasn't for Jabulani. It was for Nandi, her vision, her demands, her control. The night had been a blur of forced smiles, distant conversations, and a hollow feeling in her chest. Even Jabulani seemed distant, caught up in the whirlwind of Nandi's plans. He had tried to comfort her, to remind her that they had made vows to each other, that their love was the most important thing. But how could love stand against the tide of manipulation so strong? She turned to see Thandika approaching from behind, her face serious as always, but with a hint of concern in her eyes. "You've been quiet, Sibinjile," Thandika said, standing beside her. "I can see you're troubled. What is it?" Sibinjile didn't answer immediately. Her thoughts were heavy, but she knew that if she didn't act now, she would lose everything she had worked so hard to build. Not just the wedding but her life with Jabulani, her sense of self. Nandi had buried herself so deeply into their lives that Sibinjile had to wonder if there was any way to remove the woman without causing irreparable damage. "Thandika, I don't know how to stop this," she finally said, her voice trembling. "Nandi has already taken so much from me, my wedding, my choices, my peace of mind. How do I fight back against someone who has so much control?" Thandika's gaze was unyielding. "You fight with your own strength, Sibinjile. You don't let someone else dictate your life. It's time you remembered who you are and what you want. If you don't, you will lose everything." Sibinjile clenched her fists, her heart pounding. Thandika was right, but where did she start? How could she confront Nandi, who seemed always one step ahead, manipulating everyone around her with her charm and ruthless ambition? As if reading her thoughts, Thandika continued, "Start with Jabulani. You've built a life together. Don't let Nandi take that from you too." Sibinjile nodded, feeling a spark of resolve deep within her. She had to talk to Jabulani. She had to make him understand that this wedding, as magnificent as it seemed, wasn't what they had dreamed of. They had built their relationship on trust, on mutual respect, not on grand gestures and external approval. It was time to remind him of that. That night, as the celebrations wound down and the guests began to disperse, Sibinjile found Jabulani standing alone under a large baobab tree. His broad shoulders were slumped, and his face was shadowed by the dim light of the fire. It was here, in the solitude of the village outskirts, that he seemed most like the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had once shared her dreams of a simple, quiet life. "Jabulani," she called softly, her voice breaking the silence. He turned at the sound of her voice, his eyes softening when they met hers. "Sibinjile, my love," he said, walking towards her. "Are you okay? You've seemed so distant all evening. Is everything all right?" She took his hand, holding it tightly. "No, Jabulani. Everything is not all right. I've been thinking all night, and I need you to understand. This wedding, it's not what we wanted. It's not about us anymore. It's about Nandi's vision of what she thinks we should be." Jabulani's face grew clouded with confusion. "What do you mean? Nandi has done so much for us. She's brought the wedding to life in ways we could never have imagined. This is everything we've worked for, Sibinjile." "But it's not," Sibinjile countered, her voice growing more firm. "It's not what we wanted. This wedding is for Nandi, not for us. She's controlled every detail, every choice. Do you even remember the simple vows we made to each other? This wedding isn't about celebrating our love, it's about impressing everyone else." Jabulani's jaw clenched as he processed her words. For a long moment he stood there in silence, staring at the ground. "I didn't realize," he said slowly, his voice strained. "I've been so focused on making sure everything went smoothly, on pleasing the people, that I didn't see what was happening." Sibinjile's heart clenched as she watched the realization wash over him. She could see the weight of guilt in his eyes. "I need you to stand by me, Jabulani. I need you to remember what we're doing this for. We've always wanted a life built on love and respect, not on these grand gestures that come at the cost of who we are." Jabulani nodded, his expression shifting. "I've been blind, Sibinjile. But I see it now. This wedding isn't what I want either. I want us, just us, celebrating in the way that means something to us, not to anyone else." Sibinjile's heart soared as she felt the connection between them grow stronger. This was what she had needed to hear. They could still change things. They could still make the wedding theirs. But how do we stop it? Sibinjile asked, the urgency creeping back into her voice. Nandi has already taken control. Everyone is watching us, waiting for the next grand moment. Jabulani's eyes darkened with determination. We take control back, together. We show everyone that this is about us, not about impressing anyone. We don't need Nandi's approval. We need our own. Sibinjile nodded, a sense of peace beginning to replace the anxiety that had plagued her. She wasn't alone in this fight. Jabulani was with her, and together they could take back what was theirs. The next day, the tension that had hung over the village like a storm cloud seemed to dissipate, though it was still there, lurking beneath the surface. Sibinjile and Jabulani met with the elders, the people who had watched them grow up, who had seen the bond they shared. They explained their feelings, their desire for a simple, traditional ceremony that honored their love and the values of their community. At first, the elders were hesitant. Nandi's influence had reached far and wide, and many of the villagers had already bought into the spectacle. But Sibinjile and Jabulani were determined. They spoke from the heart, reminding the elders of the true meaning of marriage in their culture: unity, respect, and love. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick, but slowly the tide began to turn. The elders listened, and they agreed that the wedding should reflect the couple's true desires. It would still be a celebration, but it would be a celebration that belonged to them, not to anyone else. The days that followed were filled with a sense of urgency. The shift in the village was subtle at first, like the faintest ripple on the surface of the river. But it was real. Sibinjile and Jabulani, hand in hand, had started to push back against the wedding that Nandi had so carefully constructed. They weren't looking to destroy the celebration, only to reclaim it as their own. A wedding meant for them, not a performance for everyone else to watch. But Nandi wasn't someone who would let go easily. Her grip on the village, on the event, was too strong. She had given her all to make this day grand, and the idea of it being stripped away, redefined by two people she considered beneath her, was unacceptable. The tension between the bride and the wedding planner grew thick. Sibinjile could feel the cold stares, the whispers that followed her every move. Nandi's presence loomed over them, even as the couple fought to reclaim the celebration. And yet, Sibinjile wasn't afraid anymore. Jabulani was with her, and together they had the power to make this right. On the morning of the final preparations for the wedding, Sibinjile met with the elders once again. They had listened to her plea, heard the truth in her words, but Nandi's influence was not easily shaken. She had promised the village grandeur, wealth, and a day that would be talked about for generations. Now that the elders were starting to see things from Sibinjile and Jabulani's perspective, Nandi had turned on them with a fury that no one could have predicted. Sibinjile stood in the small hut that had once been her grandmother's, now adorned with brightly colored fabrics and flowers for the ceremony. Her heart raced as she watched Jabulani across the room, organizing the few simple decorations they had chosen, yet the feeling of betrayal still lingered. She had trusted Nandi, but in the end she had only been a pawn in the planner's game. What now? Jabulani's voice broke through her thoughts, his face marked with concern. What if Nandi tries to ruin everything? She has so much influence, Sibinjile. I'm worried she'll tear the village apart. Sibinjile sighed deeply, her eyes reflecting the same worry. She had never wanted this confrontation, but Nandi had forced her hand. We have to stay strong, Jabulani. We can't let her dictate our lives any longer. This is our love, our tradition, and no one, not even Nandi, can take that from us. Jabulani nodded, though his eyes betrayed his inner turmoil. He was torn between his old respect for Nandi and his love for Sibinjile. You're right. I never realized how much she had controlled us until now. It's like I was under her spell. As they stood there, gathering their resolve, the sounds of the village began to grow louder. The bustle of preparations could be heard from outside, the familiar hum of chatter and laughter as guests began arriving. But there was something off about it today, a tension in the air that seemed to mirror Sibinjile's heart. She had made her decision, but now the battle was in full swing. That afternoon, as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Sibinjile and Jabulani arrived at the wedding grounds. It was almost time. The guests had begun to settle into their seats, waiting for the grand entrance. But as they approached, they could see Nandi standing at the center of the ceremony space, holding a clipboard and barking orders at the workers. She looked as cold and calculated as ever, the picture of someone who had everything under control. But Sibinjile wasn't afraid anymore. As they walked toward Nandi, the tension between the two women was palpable. Nandi didn't turn to greet them at first, continuing her meticulous adjustments to the layout, as if they weren't even there. You're here late, Nandi finally said, her voice sharp, her eyes narrowing when she saw Sibinjile and Jabulani. The guests are already seated. The flowers aren't arranged properly. What do you two think you're doing? We're taking back control of this wedding, Nandi, Sibinjile said, her voice calm but firm. This wedding is not about you. It's about Jabulani and me. We've been too silent for too long. Nandi scoffed, clearly caught off guard by Sibinjile's boldness. This wedding is for the village, for the elders. Don't you dare think for a second you can undo everything I've worked for. Do you think the villagers will let you ruin all of this? Sibinjile stepped closer, her face hardening with determination. This is not for the village, Nandi. This is for us. You've built your empire on other people's dreams, manipulating them for your own gain. I won't let you do that to me. Not anymore. Jabulani placed a hand on Sibinjile's shoulder, giving her strength. He spoke, his voice unwavering. We've made our decision. The wedding will proceed, but it will be ours. It will be simple, meaningful, and true to us. Nandi's eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment, it seemed like she might strike out at them. But she held herself back, regaining her composure. You think this is over? You think I'll just let you take this from me? You have no idea what you're up against. Sibinjile knew Nandi wasn't just talking about the wedding. She was talking about everything, the years of manipulation, the control, the lies. It was about power. But Sibinjile wasn't afraid anymore. She had her own strength and she wasn't going to let Nandi win. We don't need your approval, Sibinjile said. We have the love and support of our people. The rest doesn't matter. Nandi's face twisted in a sneer, but she said nothing more. She turned away, walking off towards the distant crowd, her head held high, as if pretending nothing had changed. But Sibinjile knew the truth. This battle wasn't over yet. There was more to come. The ceremony began in a haze of nerves and uncertainty. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the grounds, but Sibinjile couldn't focus on anything except Jabulani beside her. The traditional songs filled the air, and the elders began their blessings. Yet, in the back of her mind, Sibinjile was waiting for Nandi's next move. The woman wouldn't let go so easily. As the ceremony reached its height, Nandi stood at the back, watching with a cold, calculating expression. But as Sibinjile and Jabulani exchanged vows, something unexpected happened. The tension in the air began to shift just slightly. The villagers, the elders, they saw the love between the couple, the sincerity in their eyes, and slowly the murmurs of approval spread. Sibinjile could feel the change, the subtle shift in the winds of the village. They had done it. They had reclaimed their love and their wedding. The sun had set, casting a warm orange glow over the village as Sibinjile and Jabulani shared their first dance as husband and wife. The drums echoed in the background, and the voices of the villagers harmonized in the celebration of their love. The air was thick with joy, the earth beneath their feet seemed to pulse with life, and for the first time in months, Sibinjile felt at peace. But even amidst the celebration, a nagging feeling lingered in her heart. Nandi had been silent for too long, and that made her nervous. She watched the woman from across the dance floor, standing by the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Sibinjile knew that Nandi wasn't one to give up easily. The planner's absence from the festivities was not a sign of defeat, it was a silence before the storm. As the evening wore on, Sibinjile and Jabulani retreated to a small corner of the grounds to catch their breath. The happiness around them was infectious, but Sibinjile's mind wouldn't stop turning. Do you think she'll let us be? Sibinjile asked quietly, her hand finding Jabulani's as they stood together. Jabulani looked at her with a soft smile, trying to calm her fears. Let's not worry about her. We've won. We've reclaimed our wedding, our love. There's nothing she can do. But Sibinjile didn't feel so sure. The memory of all the pain Nandi had caused was fresh in her mind. She had manipulated their village, their families, for so long. What if the battle wasn't really over? What if Nandi still had some power left to exert? Just then they heard a loud, sudden noise, followed by the crashing of wood. Both turned toward the sound. A group of villagers had gathered near the entrance to the ceremony grounds, surrounding Nandi, who was standing in the center, her arms wide open as though daring the world to challenge her. She's causing a scene, Sibinjile muttered under her breath, her stomach sinking. Jabulani's grip tightened on her hand. Stay here. I'll take care of it. No, Sibinjile replied firmly, shaking her head. This isn't just your fight. It's ours. With determined steps, the couple made their way toward Nandi, the sounds of the celebration now distant in their ears. The crowd parted as they approached, and Nandi, standing at the center like a queen, met them with a sneer. This wedding was never yours, Nandi said, her voice cold and sharp. You may think you've won, but in the end you're just a simple village girl. What makes you think you can challenge me? You'll always be beneath me. Sibinjile felt the anger surge inside her, but she kept her voice calm. This wedding wasn't about you, Nandi. It wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about love. And you lost sight of that. The crowd murmured around them, some villagers looking on with apprehension, others with quiet approval. Sibinjile could see that some of them had already started to turn away from Nandi's influence, but Nandi was too proud, too set in her ways to see it. She only saw a challenge to her power. You think I've lost, Sibinjile? Nandi's voice quivered with barely contained rage. You think because you've stolen this day you've won? This wedding, this entire village, it was always mine to control. Sibinjile stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. You didn't control anything. You may have thought you did, but it was never yours to own. You used people, manipulated them for your own benefit. But this is about the truth. It's about what's real. Jebulani stepped forward then, standing beside Sibinjile. He raised his voice, projecting strength. This village doesn't belong to you, Nandi. And neither does Sibinjile. You've hurt enough people and you've taken enough from us. But no more. This is our future now. For a moment there was silence. The tension was thick, hanging like a heavy storm cloud above them. Nandi's eyes blazed with anger, but Sibinjile and Jebulani stood their ground. They were no longer afraid of the woman who had once held so much power over them. Nandi's face twisted with fury, and for a split second, Sibinjile thought she might attack. But then something unexpected happened. Nandi's shoulders sagged, her posture deflating. She looked defeated, worn down by the years of manipulation, control, and lies. For a moment, it almost seemed like she had given up. You think I'm afraid of losing power? Nandi muttered, almost to herself. I've always been in control, even when I was pretending not to be. But I've lost. This wedding, this love between you, it's too pure for me to destroy. Sibinjile and Jebulani shared a look, both stunned by the unexpected admission. They had expected a fight, but not this. Nandi had finally seen the truth. There was nothing left for her to do but admit defeat. And so, Nandi turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. The villagers, watching in silence, began to murmur in quiet approval, their eyes slowly shifting toward Sibinjile and Jebulani, the couple who had brought real love back to their village. The night wore on, and the celebration continued with more joy and laughter. Sibinjile and Jebulani danced, surrounded by their friends and family, their love no longer overshadowed by fear or manipulation. The elders blessed them, the village rejoiced in the union, and the night sky seemed to sparkle with the hope of new beginnings. But Sibinjile knew that this victory, while sweet, had not come easily. It had taken courage, love, and a willingness to stand against everything that tried to break them. And in the end that was what mattered. Not the wedding, not the grand display, but the love they had fought so hard to protect. As they stood together under the stars, Sibinjile turned to Jebulani and whispered, "We've done it. We're free." Jebulani smiled, his hand finding hers. "Yes. And now we build our future, together." And so, the couple left behind the shadows of manipulation and deceit, stepping into a future where their love was the only thing that mattered. The wedding that had been so twisted and controlled was now a memory, replaced by the true beauty of a love that had survived the storm. And as the night stretched on, the village knew that Sibinjile and Jebulani's story would become the new tale told for generations to come. A tale of love, courage, and the power to stand up against even the most wicked of plots.